California's Department of Education has gotten some heat recently for trying to remove quote-unquote advanced mathematics from their high school curriculum. I'm not sure when calculus became advanced mathematics, but the critics have the issue all wrong. Nobody really learns mathematics in school. The curriculum is already so minimalist, it's comical. High schools don't even tour the different branches of mathematics but largely stick to repetitive and boring simplification calculations in algebra and trigonometry. I admit to getting straight A's in mathematics, in college, but that qualifies me to speak about how much Andrew Hacker is right in his criticism of math requirements, which create an enormous number of dropouts. What people really need is better skills at arithmetic along with a much greater numerical literacy about the world we actually live in. Only pompous fools who never took technical subjects brag about the importance of math education. Authoritarian personalities like mathematics because of its sadomasochistic qualities. It's a painstaking and tedious subject full of all kinds of arcane and unexpected difficulties. Like a lot of old-fashioned liberal arts, it's a worship of discipline for discipline's sake. After exams, people remember very little of what they spent years learning. What else could they have done with their time? John Taylor Gatto once remarked that it only takes about 50 contact hours to transmit basic literacy and math skills well enough that kids can be self-teachers from then on. Public school, on the other hand, requires a whopping 25,000 hours for the same things. The success of a math teacher like Jamie Escalante, portrayed in the 1988 film Stand and Deliver, was never reproduced. Wikipedia summarized the situation quite well. Quote: in his final years at Garfield, Escalante received threats and hate mail. By 1990, he had lost the math department chairmanship. Escalante's math enrichment program had grown to more than 400 students. His class sizes had increased to over 50 students in some cases. That was far beyond the 35-student limit set by the teachers' union, which increased its criticism of Escalante's work. In 1991, the number of Garfield students taking advanced placement examinations in math and other subjects jumped to 570. The same year, citing faculty politics and petty jealousies, Escalante and Jimenez left Garfield. Escalante found new employment at Hiram W. Johnson High School in Sacramento, California. At the height of Escalante's success, Garfield graduates were entering the University of Southern California in such great numbers that they outnumbered all the other high schools in the working-class East Los Angeles region combined. Even students who failed the AP exam often went on to study at California State University, Los Angeles. Angelo Villavicencio took over the program after Escalante's departure, teaching the remaining 107 AP students in 2 classes over the following year. 67 of Villavicencio's students went on to take the AP exam and 47 passed. The math program's decline at Garfield became apparent following the departure of Escalante and other teachers associated with its inception and development. In just a few years, the number of AP Calculus students at Garfield who passed their exams dropped by more than 80%. In 1996, Villavicencio contacted Garfield's new principal, Tony Garcia, and offered to come back to help revive the dying calculus program. His offer was rejected. End quote. Mathematics suffers more from a lack of teaching talent as much as a lack of student talent. For anyone who studies mathematics beyond the textbooks, it's an atrociously messy and confusing maze. And in a government-funded and tenured environment, what else would one expect but various self-absorbed and rambling tracks of densely and ornately symboled gibberish about subjects of no significance to real-world problems? Mimicking the habits of an aristocracy, liberal arts subjects, like mathematics, just create a government-supported leisure class living off the sweat of taxpayers. Jacob Schwichtenberg, author of the text Physics from Symmetry, wrote that, most math books are not really suited for physicists. They mostly contain definitions, theorems, and proofs with rarely any explanation why you should care about the concepts and how they can be used to describe things in the real world. Vladimir Arnold once summarized the current state of the mathematical literature perfectly: it is almost impossible for me to read contemporary mathematicians who, instead of saying Petai washed his hands, write simply, there is a T1 less than 0 such that the image of T1 under the natural mapping T1 arrow Petaya, T1, belongs the set of dirty hands, and a T2, T1 less than T2 less than or equal to 0, such that the image of T2 under the above-mentioned mapping belongs to the complement of the set defined in the preceding sentence. Or as Nobel laureate Chen Ning Yang once observed, there are only 2 kinds of math books, those you cannot read beyond the first sentence, and those you cannot read beyond the first page. Mathematicians even have problems understanding each other. To quote Cornell professor Stephen Strigatz, almost nobody understands each other in math seminars and colloquia. In math, we have a completely dysfunctional communication culture. Worse yet, almost all of us accept this absurd state of affairs. So it's simply not very realistic to expect that any outsiders like us understand what's going on. You might be wondering how things did come to be this way. Were they always this way? Surely not. A few centuries ago, almost all developments in physics and mathematics went hand in hand. For example, Isaac Newton invented calculus because he needed a tool to describe mechanics. Regarding the question of how this separation between mathematicians and other disciplines happened, once more, a great explanation is offered by Vladimir Arnold. In the last 30 years, the prestige of mathematics has declined in all countries. I think that mathematicians are partially to be blamed as well. Foremost, Hilbert and Bourbaki, the ones who proclaimed that the goal of their science was investigation of all corollaries of arbitrary systems of axioms. He elaborates further on the contribution of David Hilbert. At the beginning of this century, a self-destructive democratic principle was advanced in mathematics, especially by Hilbert, according to which all axiom systems have equal right to be analyzed, and the value of a mathematical achievement is determined, not by its significance and usefulness as in other sciences, but by its difficulty alone, as in mountaineering. This principle quickly led mathematicians to break from physics and to separate from all other sciences. In the eyes of all normal people, they were transformed into a sinister priestly caste. Bizarre questions like Fermat's problem or problems on sums of prime numbers were elevated to supposedly central problems of mathematics. As a result, many mathematicians only care about mathematics and not, for example, if what they are doing is useful for other fields. Moreover, modern mathematics is mainly characterized by rigor and formality. A major contributing factor to this development was the infamous Bourbaki group and their Bourbakisme style of mathematical literature. One project of this group of mathematicians was to write textbooks that provide completely rigorous expositions. They believed that a series of such textbooks would be essential for the future progress in mathematics. While their books turned out to be influential, they made it harder for mathematicians to communicate with researchers in other disciplines like physics. To this day, many mathematicians write hard-to-read Bourbaki-style papers. However, quite telling is that while the Bourbaki textbooks do not contain examples and non-rigorous arguments, their personal communications are full of them. This reminds me of the story recounted by Anthony Z in his book Quantum Field Theory in a Nutshell that a Fields medalist once told him that top mathematicians secretly think like physicists and after they work out the broad outline of a proof they then dress it up with epsilons and deltas. What's even more absurd is that analysis is an outmoded and illogical mathematics headed towards a finite algebra of ultra-finitest foundations, which rids it of its so-called mystery and paradox. Where the mathematicians were obsessing over arcane problems in algebraic topology, the most productive and useful advances in 20th century mathematics were done by people you never heard of, like Frank Harary. During his long and productive career, Dr. Harary published over 800 papers, with some 300 different co-authors, in areas as diverse as anthropology, biology, chemistry, computer science, geography, linguistics, music, physics, political science, psychology, social science, and of course mathematics, which brought forth the usefulness of graph theory in scientific thought. This was more than any mathematician other than the celebrated Paul Erdős. Brian Rotman wrote of Erdős that he was eccentric, socially dysfunctional, obsessive, childishly egocentric, and helplessly dependent on a fellow number of freaks to feed him, transport him, put him up and put up with him. While I praise John Nash's ideas about asymptotically ideal money, bizarre minds produce bizarre ideas. Rotman wrote that Nash was overbearing, secretive, and abrasive, with a stormy marriage, an illegitimate son and several complicated liaisons with men, a self-proclaimed conqueror, iconoclast, and revolutionary who wrestled with ultra-difficult problems in the depths. It's no wonder he channeled Cold War paranoia into the mathematics of game theory. As for Fields medalists, mostly nobody even understands the derivative drivel they're working on, making their knowledge entirely useless to other enterprises. It could be argued that colleges largely exist to rob productive endeavors of talent. But that would be exaggerating. The main actor in mathematics, down to the very concept of number itself, is symmetry. As much as you may have heard about gauge symmetry, nature exhibits very little symmetry and that's why the circularity of mathematics makes it worse than useless when confronting real-world problems. I say worse than useless because mathematical models are usually misleading, given that they oversimplify the world, ignore higher-order effects and rely upon tremendous amounts of statistical cancellation. Apart from the Sputnik propaganda you might have heard, mathematics is not all that powerful and it's not all that beautiful either. For instance, you usually can't solve the Schrödinger equation exactly, so you resort to variational methods, WKB approximation, or perturbation theory. I have never heard anyone refer to the beauty of tensor calculus or the elegance of vertex algebra. It's a corny and clunky erector set of arcane and tedious tools running in human-invented circles and that's why a great deal of mathematical modeling requires massive supercomputers. It's nothing profound. Most proofs consist of chaotic or arbitrary steps that appear out of left field and very little is straightforward. Mathematicians don't make very good computer programmers but hackers because their peregrine proofs contain mostly quirky idiosyncrasies and kinky shortcuts. It's exactly the wrong kind of training for an engineering mind. It elevates cleverness over good design. As John Zerzan has eloquently maintained, mathematics is really a value system and it's dehumanizing us every day. It's a tool deployed to engineer an inhuman scale and abstract away all the important dimensions of life. We worship it at our peril.